Hello and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and today we're talking drugs. No, we're not talking illegal drugs, we're talking legal drugs, pharmaceuticals, and how the precursors to the drugs that you get from your doctor, from your pharmacist, could potentially be grown hydroponically. Now, lots of drugs start off as botanicals. They are plants that are harvested and the extracts are purified, and many drugs are either started off as plants or were once plants and are now synthesized in a factory. So there are some really interesting examples. So the Pacific yew is where we get Taxol from, and the scientific name for yew is Taxus. So Taxol is the active ingredient in that Pacific yew that is an anti-cancer drug. And the Madagascar periwinkle is a plant that cures or controls non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And let's have a think. Willow is the precursor to aspirin. These are all off the top of my head. Let's think of some other drugs. Well, heroin, methadone, codeine. These are all opiates that start life as an opium poppy. I think there's a company in the UK who's to control all the opium poppies around the world. I'm not sure if they grow them in the UK. So it's near Oxford or something like that. And very little information about that company. Probably it's controlled information. Not much on company's house and things like that. Not sure where they grow the opiates and things like this, but they're so, or whether they still grow them or they're made in a factory. Anyway, lots of medicinal plants are used for pharmaceuticals. I'm going to ignore legal cannabis. So that's an aside. There's too much on hydroponics about legal cannabis. This is just for those interested in other pharmaceuticals. So ginsengs and other such things, plants, artemisia, stuff like that. So why would you grow them hydroponically? Well, it allows precise control over nutrient regimes, light, temperature, sterility. And that means that you've got a much more consistent crop at the end, or in theory, you should have. Whereas if you're growing outdoors in soil, depending on where you grow, you have different conditions and different produce, a bit like wine. You know, you could have different drugs that had different effects like different wines. So you want consistency, and hydroponics gives you that. And you can grow a number of different plants. So let's have a look at some of those. Ginseng. Chinese and Panax ginsengs have been extensively studied in hydroponics because they're currently wild harvested, and the harvesting of those from the wild can lead to habitat degradation. So juvenile ginseng grown hydroponically shows a significant increase in ginsenoside content. That's the active ingredient, and including the leaves and the roots. And you harvest the tube, I think it's a tuber or a rhizome. And hydroponic ginseng can even be used to synthesize zinc oxide nanoparticles with anti-cancer properties. And then fermentation of the hydroponically ginseng with beneficial bacteria enhances its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory activity, making it an attractive ingredient in pharmaceuticals and cosmetics, which is another one to consider. But a lot of botanicals go into cosmetics. Other high-value botanicals, artemisia and tradescantia, easy for me to say, they're traditional methods. You can increase growth and biomass with hydroponics. I think artemisia is used in anti-malarial compounds now. It's the wormwoods are artemisia, but potentially I think that's used in absinthe as well. So you could have hydroponic absinthe. There's one for you. Turmeric, ashwagandha, bacopa, holy basil, centilla, these all exhibit up to 3-fold higher alkaloid and active ingredient compounds compared to field-grown plants. So amazing opportunities there. So even though it's more expensive, you could increase production and yield and active ingredient content. Now, when it comes to a tomato is a tomato in the supermarket, and if it's red, and people will buy it. They don't care if the antioxidant activity is 3 times higher or the lycopene content is 50% higher, because it's just a tomato. And so you've got to compete on it being just a tomato. Whereas if you're growing pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, then you do care about the active ingredient content very much so. So that's where hydroponics becomes much more of an advantage in these situations. So if you're looking for a plant to grow, then pharmaceuticals or cosmetics would be a better choice than a leafy green, which would be a standard product traded on very low margins. So hydroponic systems, you could grow them in shipping container farms if it's a small amount, or a vertical farm if it's large amounts. Something like Madagascar periwinkle needs vast amounts of biomass to produce just a small amount of the drug. So you probably want to go in a vertical farm for that one. The other advantage is it's pesticide free, potentially. So something that pharmaceutical grade purity you'd want, and then also reduction in molds. If it's a botanical that's being sold rather than like a formulated product, then it would have to be proven to be low in mold or free of mold, just like in legal cannabis. So that's important to consider. You've also got year-round production, and your finance director will be happy because you're not having to wait 12 months to produce the crop, and it's consistency and regular supply and things like this. So you could tailor the nutrient regime and the additives to stimulate production of the bioactives when required as well, just before harvest. The disadvantage is the costly infrastructure, lighting, automation, monitoring, and because they are obscure plants, then they're not. You can't just get a list of requirements and nutrient requirements and growth curve requirements off the internet. You have to come up with these. So there's a disadvantage, but it's a challenge, and it's the reason why you could have an advantage over everyone else once you sort them. And then obviously, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, there are massive regulatory hurdles to overcome. If you wanted to launch a new pharmaceutical, it would cost you millions and millions of pounds, and you would need to have all sorts of certificates and checks and things like this. So just as you would if you're going to produce a biopesticide from a hydroponic crop, cost you at least £1 million. So there's something to consider. Other options, if you're doing something like a kombucha, so it's not necessarily a pharmaceutical, but a health product, you could have the fermentation microbial technology tanks on site, and you could use the CO2 to feed the grow rooms. That's another option. So there's lots of opportunities there in pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and health products for hydroponics. If you've got an interesting one that you'd like to feature on Hydroponics Daily, then please do get in touch. And if you think I've missed something important, then please do get in touch as well. So hydroponic cultivation of medicinal botanicals offers clean, potent, and efficient production paths, potentially. There's a couple of challenges, but those challenges are potentially your unique selling points over everybody else if you get it right. So I've tried to grow ginseng before in my greenhouse. I grew it for 5 or 6 years, and then I realized that the seeds I bought off eBay were not actually ginseng. They were Pennsylvanian ash, completely worthless plants. So always make sure when you're growing pharmaceutical crops that you're growing the plants that you think you are.